2 years ago, I put out a review of Season 1 of the Netflix animated short anthology Love, Death, and Robots. It did numbers that would probably be seen as a failure by many, but for my channel, it was big. At the time of me writing this, it's the 13th most viewed video on my channel. And last weekend, Part 2 came out. Thank you all for giving me an excuse to binge this sooner than I usually would. Normally, I try to finish some season of another show I'm watching first and end up procrastinating for months or something. Anyway, Part 2. It's a lot shorter than last season, which had 18 episodes. This one only has 8. I've actually added up the runtime for all of these episodes, and the whole thing came out to exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes long, which I guess helps with the binging. But the few episodes we got are still pretty good. Obviously, some are better than others, but that's the case for all anthology series. I don't think there were any episodes here that I actually disliked, though. They have noticeably toned down the sex and violence that was at least partially a selling point for the first season, but that only really shows more focus on the stories. Yes, most of the previous episodes would have still been just as good without the gore and nudity. So, since this is an anthology, the best way to talk about this is probably to discuss the individual episodes, much like I did with Season 1. This should also leave me with more to say in every video I make about this. Also, apparently every segment in the first except for 2 were based on a short story, and I only mentioned the source material for a few of them. Now, every single episode here is based on a short story, so I'll be sure not to make that mistake again. Now, on we go. The first episode is called Automated Customer Service, based on a short story by John Scalzi, directed by the animation team Meat Department, and with the script written by both of them. It's about a woman in a futuristic retirement community whose robot servant has malfunctioned and now wants to kill her. And as the title may indicate, she spends most of the episode on the phone with customer service who is unhelpful in stopping it. This could have easily been a one-joke premise, but it has just enough smart writing to keep it fun and funny throughout. It's a silly comedy, but take away the customer service comic relief and it might actually make a decent thriller. While it's unlikely to actually scare anyone, there is a sort of will-she-get-out energy to it, but not nearly enough to underlie the humor. My complaints are mostly with the design of the human characters. Seriously, what the hell is this? But if you can get past that, this is one of the better ones here. Up next is Ice, from Robert Valley, director of last season's fan favorite Zima Blue, and written by Philip Gerlat, writer of Europa Report, based on the story by Rich Larson. And this isn't nearly as good as Zima Blue, but it's still decent. It takes place on a planet where many people are modified with superhuman abilities. 2 teenage boys, one modified and one not, go into a dangerous race to prove themselves to their peers. In a reversal of the first episode, the art style is the best part. The 2D models sometimes look a little awkward when done in 3D animation, but for the most part they look good. The story is pretty simple and a little forgettable, but it's still passable. The fact that this is the weakest of the season says more about the quality of the season than it does this episode. Next one is called Pop Squad, based on the story by Paolo Bacigalupi, from Jennifer U. Nelson, director of Kung Fu Pandas 2 and 3, and written by... Alright, every episode was written by Philip Gerlat unless I say otherwise. It's a story about a future where people live forever, but because of that there's overpopulation, so the main character's job is to stop that by taking out any new children. Once again, Kung Fu Panda. This uses the video game-like motion capture animation that the show occasionally pushes. Everything else is reminiscent of Blade Runner, with a hard-boiled noir-style character in a future world whose job is to kill people, and he begins to question what he does. It's obviously not a very uplifting episode, but it's a pretty interesting and involving dystopian sci-fi story. And now on to episode 4, Snow in the Desert, based on the story by Neil Asher and directed by these guys, who also did the other fan favorite episode, Beyond the Aquila Rift. It's about a man named Snow who lives in the desert. He has the power to regenerate his body, but because of that, bounty hunters want him. It doesn't have Beyond the Aquila Rift's existential horror or a twist that's quite as earth-shaking, but it's still a very interesting story. It has probably the most realistic animation of all of these. As a side note, it's also probably the only one that keeps the first season's levels of violence, but not in a way that feels like too much. This is another high point of the season. An interesting sci-fi action with a few surprises along the way. Up next is The Tall Grass, directed by Simon Otto, an animator from DreamWorks and based off a short story by Joe R. Lansdale. It's about a train in what looks like the 1800s. It breaks down in a field of tall grass and the passenger heads out to investigate some weird lights in the field, a decision which he's going to regret. Personal anecdote. About halfway through, I had to pause to make sure this wasn't an adaptation of the Stephen King and Joe Hill story In the Tall Grass, which was the source of a completely different Netflix movie which I had put out a review 2 years ago. It wasn't. But at that point, with him lost in the grass, it easily could have been, just in a different setting and under slightly different circumstances. Fortunately, it differentiates itself from that one near the end. I, and a lot of other people, thought that the movie was a boring, self-indulgent mess. This episode is a lot better. It is an intriguing Lovecraftian horror short with a good amount of tension. And it also features some great creature design. It's worth your time. And now on to All Through the House. Well, this is something. Directed by Elliot Deer and based off the story by Joaquin Hiendermans. Probably butchered that name. It's the Christmas episode. Two children wake up in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve and try to get a glimpse of Santa, and, well, this story goes somewhere. This is the kind of concept that needs to be seen to be believed. The best way to describe this is like a sweet holiday story told through the eyes of a horror film, with a very dry sense of humor, which stems mostly from the fact of this episode's existence, the fact that this is happening right now. And it features a creature whose design puts the tall grass to shame. It looks like something out of a Guillermo del Toro movie. I hope to remember to watch this again once the holiday season comes. This is weirdly my favorite for the season. And then comes Life Hutch, directed by Alex Beatty and based off the story by Harlan Ellison. It also features the voice of Michael B. Jordan. Hey, remember when I said automated customer service could make a decent straight-up thriller? Well, this is what that might look like, with a twist. Jordan plays a soldier in space who crash lands next to another downed ship, where the maintenance spot has malfunctioned to the point where it now kills anything that moves. And so Jordan just needs to not move, and yet somehow find a way to get out of there. It's like a cross of the setting and atmosphere of Alien with the tension and ideas of something like A Quiet Place or Don't Breathe. I do feel like it would have been a bit more tense if it had a bit more time, but it's still pretty damn tense. It's a good thriller that's yet another high point for the season. And finally, the last one is the much more mellow The Drowned Giant, based on the story by J.G. Ballard and written and directed by none other than the show's creator, Deadpool and Terminator Dark Fate director, Tim Miller. In it, the dead body of a giant washes onto a beach and attracts the attention of the locals, especially one man who was sent to study it. This is the quieter, more allegorical episode of the series. It's more interested in how the body decomposes and how the people eventually forget about it than any of the fantastical elements. I probably made it sound like some boring art house film, but its short runtime stops it from getting to that point. In the end, it's an interesting and imaginative allegory for the decay of beauty and how people just forget about miracles. It could be applied to how we look at nature or whatever. It's up to the viewer's interpretation. I'll admit it's kind of weird that they're describing a dead body as the pinnacle of beauty and nature's wonders, but it's still an oddly beautiful closer to this season. As a whole, I'll admit that, unlike Season 1, there wasn't any of them that made me think, I want to see more of this. But on the flip side, that also means that these are just more satisfying as standalone shorts. Season 3 has already been confirmed. Hopefully that one will be much longer and have more stuff for us all to enjoy.